a conductive wire, and you were so electric. I had no say when you came so near, and just passed right through me.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is Back. I'm your host, Deanna Chapman, and today I'm joined by Alex DiVincenzo from Broke Horror Fan, and we are talking all about the original Child's Play, which is from 1988. Not the 2019 one, because that will probably be a whole different episode at some point, but we'll probably touch on it a little, Alex, because I know you've seen it.
Yes, that's right. But I'm excited to talk about the original today. I think it holds up pretty well, and the series is still going, which is kind of a weird phenomenon that it was remade, but at the same time the original franchise is still going. There's a TV series supposed to be coming out next year.
That is definitely crazy, and a lot of these franchises that started in the 70s and 80s have sort of taken on a life of their own, and some we love, some we didn't ask for, like Children of the Corn.
Yeah, that one was kind of forced into a franchise, but Child's Play is a unique one in that it has a sole creator at the basis of all of it. Don Mancini, he wrote every entry and has directed the last three, and I think it's that reason that it's such a solid franchise. It definitely has its ups and downs. I know you've only seen the first one so far, but it dips a bit in the middle. But I love Child's Play 2. I think Child's Play, the original, is the best film in the franchise, but Child's Play 2 is the most fun, I would argue. But regardless, it's one of those franchises that like some people do like the sequels more because there's one creator, but they're also all different in terms of tone. Like he gets comedic for a while, then they kind of did almost like a soft reboot, but it still stayed in the same continuity. I don't know. I mean, I'm excited for you to kind of dive in beyond this, but yeah, it's a good franchise in that regard. I think only that I can think of out of like the major ones is Child's Play and Phantasm that had one creator involved from the start.
Okay. Yeah, I have seen the first Phantasm movie as well. I'm very good at like watching the first ones, and then I kind of wait a bit to dive into everything else. Like Halloween, I've seen the first one and the latest one because you didn't really need everything in between necessarily to understand what happened between that first one and, the one, 40 years later, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. And that was smart on their part too, because it erased those, so you didn't have to worry about the baggage. All you need to know was, Michael Myers after Jamie Lee Curtis, and that's about it.
Yeah, so I have now seen the first Halloween movie, the first Friday the 13th, the first Nightmare on Elm Street. I've seen the first Phantasm, now the first Child's Play. I'm getting there slowly but surely, and I know I've been sending you pictures like every time I buy a box set of something and things like that, and asking you questions about some that are hard to find because thankfully Child's Play, they had the 7-disc box set that had come out before the latest movie had come out. So it's like the latest one is the only one I don't own, but it's on streaming more often than the others, so that works out nicely. But with this one, I went into it not really knowing what to expect. I had known what Chucky looked like for years and years and years now because the character is so iconic. How could you not?
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great design, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have Brad Dourif playing the voice of Chucky, and he also plays Charles Lee Ray, which we'll get into that in a moment. But your core cast really is Catherine Hicks, Chris Sarandon, and Alex Vincent.
Yeah, all people who had like pretty well-established careers, at least on a small scale at that point.
Yeah.
And then I think all of them, well, except Alex Vincent, I should take that back, but the adult cast, did pretty well both before and after the film.
Yeah, for Alex Vincent, it seems like he's one of those child actors who is really only known for his role in this franchise, kind of the same way that, I forget his name, but the kid who played Danny Torrance in Kubrick's Shining.
Yes, I forget. His name's also Danny in real life. Danny Lloyd.
Yeah, there we go. I space on names of especially children actors who don't go on to do a whole lot because it's like, you know them from this one thing, but sometimes their name escapes you. And that happens at times too, because I don't know if it's something where these horror movies that they're in terrify them so much to the point that they don't want to do anything else, or they just happened to fall into these roles and didn't really have an interest in acting later on. But I thought the cast for this was very solid. Each character plays their role really, really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, to your point about child actors, I think a lot of them maybe sort of age out of it. Like Alex Vincent was this cute little kid, and he came back for Child's Play 2 a couple years later, and then did very little after that, and then he later returned to the franchise in some of the later sequels. But yeah, I feel like there's a tendency that they'll just age out once they're in like their preteen years, and then maybe if they're into it, pursue it again. I think he like produces music now, which is cool, but he's super active at conventions, and he'll bring a Chucky doll to pose with and stuff. Very down to earth guy, and I have to say he's was a really good child actor. If I'm being frank here, I think he's better as a kid actor than he is as an adult in some of the later ones.
Okay.
He comes off. I mean, it's obviously some of the problems that all child actors have. He has in Child's Play, but in general, I think it's one of the stronger child performances in a horror movie that rests solely on the child's performance, because he really is at the center.
Right. And I think he has that perfect tone of voice where he can be this annoying kid when he wants, but otherwise he's kind of just like this adorable kid who talks to a doll. And while he thinks the doll is talking back to him, because it is, as it turns out, the story behind this, I think, works really well from a child's perspective, and just having him as sort of the main role in the story, because it wouldn't make sense for the doll to not have a child to interact with.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a smart setup. It's obviously not like the first spooky doll movie, or content, I guess you'd call it, because Twilight Zone did a Taki Tina episode that's like not exactly the same, but has similar notes, albeit 20, 30 years earlier. But it certainly kind of broke new ground for how it approached it, I feel, and a lot of imitators have come since, certainly in its immediate wake, and then like more recently stuff like Annabelle.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it a ripoff or even derivative, but I feel like it's from the same mold. If we didn't have Child's Play, we may not have Annabelle.
Absolutely. And there are some other movies in the horror genre where there are dolls or puppets or things like that involved. I mean, you have Puppet Master, which I haven't seen, but you also have things like Slappy from Goosebumps, who has made the transition from the Goosebumps books to the screen. And even, there's a character that looks like Slappy in Toy Story 4 that gives it sort of this kind of horror element to it. So you definitely have this thing where dolls can be as creepy as you need them to be. And I think that plays off really, really well in this, because when you just get the commercial of the doll and stuff, it doesn't necessarily look like a creepy doll, even when you see them all lined up in the store. But it's just that one act of bringing the doll to life that instantly makes it much creepier than it looks sitting on a shelf.
Yeah, and I think it's been stated multiple times that Chucky was kind of inspired by the My Buddy doll, and then to a lesser extent Cabbage Patch Kids, which were super popular at the time. And I do think there's something about, like, even as an adult, I think it's the eyes that do it, at least for me. But dolls can be super creepy. There's like a, if they look too human, and again, I think it's the eyes, because Chucky has super realistic looking eyes that they seem kind of like they follow you. And I can definitely see, like, why somebody would think, oh, this will be a good horror movie.
Yeah, and the fact that they give you that opening too helps just give you a better idea of where the story is going to go. I wouldn't say it's necessarily predictable, but giving Chucky this revenge motive to fuel the plot really helps move things along, because it's not like, oh, this boy just got this random doll that came to life. There's like a whole backstory as to why the doll came to life.
Yeah, I like that it has motivation that makes sense. I mean, at least in a suspension of disbelief movie kind of way. I will say, I always found the opening a little weird. I mean, I love it. Brad Dourif, like, totally chews the scenery. I love seeing him as, a real human before he's just Chucky's voice for pretty much the rest of the series,
Mhm.
except for like a random flashback. But it's weird because, I mean, the prologue shows us, the audience, that the doll is possessed. But then the first act of the movie, after that, basically sets it up as if that prologue didn't exist, as if maybe it is Andy doing these killings, because that's what the characters believe at first. And I love that they toy with the characters like that. I almost wish the prologue maybe came in. Maybe that was a a end of first act revelation, that it's like, oh no, here's what happened. Um, because then as the viewer, you'd be wondering, well, certainly not now that we all know Chucky, but in 1988, you'd be wondering, okay, is this kid doing it, or is it really the doll?
Yeah, I love that the adults have this struggle because he's such an adorable little boy that you don't want to believe he would be the one doing this. At least, the detective doesn't want to believe it. His mom definitely doesn't believe it. There's no way he would have ever pushed, quote unquote, Aunt Maggie out the window. She's not really his aunt, but she's obviously taken care of him enough and been around him enough to where the mom was like, no, that's not what happened here. And because of the fact that he is so obsessed with the good guys, he has the pajamas that have the same, pattern on the feet as the doll's shoes.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a clever little switch. And again, like, that would have been a good setup if we as the viewers didn't already know, it was definitely the doll. But I love how they set Andy up as such a sweet kid. That scene where he makes breakfast for his mom. It's his birthday, but he wakes her up by making her this, terrible breakfast that she has to pretend is good, but just, makes a mess of it and, burns the toast, puts like a whole stick of butter on it. But it's like adorable. It's this real sweet mother-son relationship that's, obviously a super important dynamic to make the rest of the film work.
Right. And even when he's disappointed, he doesn't throw temper tantrums. And I think it's because he's a kid who understands that his mom is doing everything she can, because he is disappointed when he gets clothes instead of the doll and only gets the toolkit instead of the doll. But he's not like throwing, this big hissy fit over it.
Right. He's definitely not a spoiled kid, because it's such a good setup, because he gets this big box that could definitely fit a good guy doll in it, and it's just filled with clothes. And you can see the disappointment in his face, but he doesn't, like you said, doesn't throw a temper tantrum about it or anything. It's obvious that the mom is struggling. She's a single mom, and it's $100 doll, not something she can just get right away. And again, I think that helps set up the empathy of their dynamic.
It's like he understands what she means when she's talking to him as if he were an adult, because she's like, I didn't know about it in time to save up for it. So he has this concept of money already, so to speak, that I think a lot of kids wouldn't have. And it's not really clear if his dad is just out of the picture or if something happened to the dad. It kind of felt more like something happened to the dad.
Yeah, I've seen this franchise a bunch of times. I can't recall if they ever dig deeper into the father. So I'm not sure. I don't know that they ever mention one way or another how that happened. Or maybe there's like a weird novelization somewhere that mentions his father.
Yeah, and so it showed how strong their relationship was throughout, from the breakfast making scene to his disappointment to the mom running out during her job to go buy one of the dolls from a homeless guy. And you kind of get this creepy feeling. You're like, is that a good idea? Probably not. But at the same time, you're like, it's just a doll. And we all know, even I knew, because I knew that Chucky came to life. I didn't know exactly how, but after that opening scene, you're like, okay, obviously this adorable boy is going to get this horrendous doll. And one of the other things I love that they did with the story was giving us some of the POV from Chucky.
Yes, I did like that. They used that again a lot in that first act, where it could be Andy's point of view or Chucky's.
Right.
And then this sort of leads into when the mom discovers the batteries. And then Chucky reveals himself to her, and now we see a lot more of Chucky as the doll moving around. Even those, not only is that scene really good, but the Chucky effects hold up pretty well. They used a mix of like puppetry, an animatronic doll, and a little person in clothes.
Yeah.
And the way it's directed, the way it's edited together, it holds up pretty well, I think.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll just see Chucky's hand reach for something, and you don't want that to look like a human hand. You want it to look like a doll hand, and you can tell it's kind of like plasticky, rubbery, and I think that worked well. And practical effects always go a long way, especially in horror, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I would say Chucky is probably one of the most, not only most impressive but most recognizable. Whether you call it an effect or prop or whatever, things in a horror movie from the 80s. And then Kevin Yeager, who created him, married Catherine Hicks because they met on set. So there's a little love story there too.
That's a fun little fact that I did not know.
I don't believe it lasted, but they did get married. So
things not lasting in Hollywood is not always surprising.
I take that back. Forget it. They did. They're still married. So that's great. That's even better.
Yeah, that is certainly better than it not working out. But I think one of my favorite things about this was how they kind of kept subverting your expectations every time you think maybe they're going to get Chucky. And obviously the series goes on, the franchise goes on, so you know there's something else that's going to happen. But they give you this sort of hopeful moment where, oh, they're going to get away from him. And then you find out why he's getting his revenge, and you get the focus taken off of the family for at least a little bit, because Chucky's going to go kill his old partner who drove off on him while the cop, who is Mike, was chasing him at the beginning. And then he goes after the guy who gave him, I guess you can call it, the spell that put him in the doll's body.
Yeah, he's like a voodoo teacher, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Voodoo guru.
That part was a little strange, that scene in particular, because they needed to explain it more because that guy wasn't in it previously. It's not like the opening where we knew someone drove off on him.
Right, yeah. It was almost like they just kind of wanted another death scene and a little more pad the runtime, because it's just under 90 minutes, which I think is like the perfect length for a horror movie like this. But maybe they needed another 5 or 10 minutes later in the stage of the script.
Plus, they kind of needed to explain how he knew that sort of spell, enchantment, whatever you want to call it, at the beginning, because as soon as he started speaking, I was like, what is going on?
Yes, that's true. I mean, nowadays it would just be somebody like Googling voodoo spells, but yes, back then you needed a person for exposition.
Yeah, you also have the fact that Andy's just running around town and going through these really bad parts, and nobody seems to notice him.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's like the 80s for you, but yeah, it's like south side of Chicago, this little kid just kind of, he takes a train, he wanders to like these derelict, buildings where these criminals live, and just no one bats an eye at him.
Which is funny because, people see those areas as horrible, crime-ridden areas, but then this kid can just walk by, and it's like everybody does still mind their own business.
Yeah, exactly. And we should know, I don't think, we call him a kid a lot, but just for reference, if you haven't seen the movie and you're listening to us, he's only 6 years old. So he's like a really little kid. It's not like he's like a 12-year-old. Not that would be much better, but at least a little less, wouldn't draw as much attention. But again, no one bats an eye. Yeah,
and again, horror movies sort of just suspension of disbelief. You're like, okay, well, we'll just let this slide. The way that Chucky comes back after his head has been shot off, after he's been shot in the heart, and blood actually splatters on the wall, you're just like, yeah, of course he's going to come back. It's a horror movie. Yeah, I do love that last, that finale where there's like 3 different instances where you think Chucky might be dead, or like in another horror movie that would be the end.
but he just keeps coming back, and that's like a pretty apropos. That's like symbolism for the rest of the franchise because they kill him at the end of every one, and he keeps coming back, and they do get more and more clever with how they bring him back and expanding the mythology. So it's fun. I mean, that's why I enjoy it, particularly when it has again, it has the same creator throughout. It's kind of fun seeing how creative they get in bringing him back and also expanding the story.
After I watched this, because I just watched it over the weekend, and yesterday I watched Halloween 2, it kind of reminded me, Halloween 2 reminded me of that final Chucky scene where he's like burned and still going and his head isn't there when Dr. Loomis shoots Michael Myers, like, I want to say at least a few more times in the hospital in Halloween 2. And he's laying on the ground and he's just yelling at the cop not to touch him. And the cop goes and bends over him. And it's just like, you people do not listen. And
they don't learn.
It really felt like those two were kind of parallels almost.
Yeah, I could see. I had never thought of that, but it's funny you mentioned that. Yeah. And I mean, obviously Halloween 2 was super successful. So it's entirely possible, Tom Holland, who directed Child's Play, might have picked up a little bit of that.
Yeah, maybe, because Child's Play definitely came, I want to say, at least 6 or 8 years after Halloween 2?
Yeah, because Halloween 2 was 81 and Child's Play was 88.
Okay.
So 7 years.
Right in the middle there. I knew I was close. But yeah, it's interesting to start watching all of these franchises and see like, okay, these people were clearly somewhat influenced by each other at some point. I can't imagine something like Halloween existing if maybe Black Christmas hadn't existed first.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the first Child's Play could have been its own self-contained movie. Again, I'm sure obviously the filmmakers were familiar with the genre and the tropes. Tom Holland has a long history of making horror movies.
Right.
But once you get to
not the
sequels,
Spider-Man Tom Holland, just in case anyone is wondering.
No. This Tom Holland also made Fright Night a few years earlier, which is another, classic 80s horror. But I feel like it has a lot of like the slasher conventions, but it's not really until Child's Play 2 that it becomes a straight up like slasher franchise. Like Chucky is trying to be the new Freddy Krueger, for better or for worse. Again, I like part 2 a lot, but it certainly has its ups and downs as you go from there.
We mentioned earlier that this one is definitely more of a revenge story, and it takes away the unpredictability of Chucky, which I think is okay though, because when you're watching something like Halloween, you never know who Michael Myers is going to choose to kill and who he isn't, because like I said, I just watched Halloween 2 after watching this, and he literally goes into a house, picks up a knife, and leaves the two people in the house alive.
Right, yeah.
Because they aren't teenagers, and he doesn't necessarily only kill teenagers, but that definitely seems to be more of his body count, at least in the first 2 movies that I've seen so far. And with Chucky, it's like he has a set purpose, and I don't know how that plays out in the later movies just yet, but with this one, they were like, okay, this is a revenge story. And like you said, it does have some slasher elements here and there. He takes the scalpel and stabs people with it, especially the doctor where Andy is being observed. And I just like that this wasn't just like, hey, here's a killer for killer's sake.
Right, yeah, I think that's a smart approach for the script. I will say, side note about Halloween 2, that introduces Laurie being Michael's sister. So that gives him motivation that, frankly, I think was unnecessary. I like that he was just this boogeyman. Like, it was kind of, like you said, he's just killing at random, basically. You don't know whether you could be next. And I think they smartly erased that for the new one. But as you said, yes, Chucky has a definitive purpose. He wants revenge, and then he needs to, get Andy to become human again. And that, they certainly carry that over for at least the next couple sequels, and then they kind of expand the mythology in some wacky ways, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any particular favorite moments from this movie?
I mentioned the breakfast scene. I know that doesn't even have Chucky in it, but like that's just such an endearing moment. Really feel like something I could relate to when I watched it when I was younger, as a kid. And now that I'm older, I don't have kids, but I have a young nephew. I feel like, I can relate to it on a different level. Um, but as a Chucky moment, just that entire finale where he keeps getting what seems like Chucky keeps getting stopped, but just never does. The fire, the explosions of his head, it's just things that a lesser movie would just end on one of those notes, but Child's Play has like three of them before the movie actually ends. I love that.
I really enjoyed the sequence where Maggie is watching Andy and, she's telling him, go brush your teeth, and he listens, and she's like, oh, okay, he's brushing his teeth, he's being a good little boy. And then you kind of see Chucky running down the hallway in the background, and she's reading a book, and she puts it down and kind of looks, and the chair moves, and you have all of these different things that are happening, and you don't really see Chucky, or you kind of see his point of view, and he's like peeking around a corner looking to see where people are. And that whole first death, I think, really sets the tone for how we are going to see Chucky not only getting around, but as a killer.
Yeah, that raises a good point because like I said, by part two, he becomes like your more typical slasher villain. And then he goes like full on horror comedy, which is a whole different direction. But it's almost easy to forget if you've seen them all a million times that like the first movie, like it's really creepy for what it is. I mean, they have those. I love those like you said, like the movement in the background, or the just like ominous shots of Chucky not moving, but like that he can. I feel like it builds a good tension. And a fun side note, because you mentioned Children of the Corn earlier, some of the shots where Chucky is running around, where they needed a little person in the suit, is played by John Franklin, who was Isaac in the Children of the Corn movie.
That is very interesting. He is definitely someone who is perfectly creepy in horror movies.
Yeah. Yes.
To say the least. And that might be one of the few nice things I have to say about Children of the Corn. But yeah, overall, I really had a lot of fun with this. And I think with these first movies, it feels like sometimes they don't know that there's going to be as many more as there end up being, because I know, what was it, Friday the 13th never really intended to have sequels, but it did so well that the studio's like, hey guys, we need more.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of them. I think maybe by the time it got to Child's Play, because the '80s was so sequelized, they probably had it in the back of their mind that like, oh, maybe we could do more. At least the studio.
Yeah, but they didn't make the movie end that way. Like they knew there was going to be another one.
Right. But that's such like, I mean, it's a broader topic, but like everything today is announced as, like the start of a franchise or, the relaunch of this cinematic universe. They always have like these big plans, and then like if the movie's a dud, you never see anything. So feels like you only get part of a story sometimes. Like you're watching a full movie, but it's really like the first act of a larger piece. And sometimes the rest doesn't come, which feels like a weird ripoff. But back then, these movies were being produced, and the market was in such a way that it was, let's make one and see what happens, and then maybe if it does well, we can come back. Yeah, you mentioned Friday the 13th, and even I mean Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. All the creators have gone on record saying like, we never thought we were going to make another one, didn't even want to make another one, but like that was, once the first one was a success, that's what the studio wanted, that's what the audiences wanted.
Yeah, it's just really amazing how these franchises have taken on lives of their own over the years, because so many of them are still going.
Yeah, I get it. Child's Play was one of the last holdouts for a reboot. Like I said, the original continuity is still going on. They're like I said, TV series in development, which is exciting. But yeah, I mean, they released like the most recent sequel was only in 2017, and now the TV series is supposed to be coming out next year, which will presumably follow the original timeline. and then the reboot came out last year, which I think it's a weird situation that MGM owns the name Child's Play, but not the Chucky like name and character or something weird like that. Because after a certain point, all the sequels are called Chucky, not Child's Play. Um, so that reboot, like it's worth watching if you particularly if you like this one. I think it does some interesting things. It does what I prefer from a remake, which is taking like the core concept and using that to update the story to modern times with modern effects and a bigger budget. And it does do some interesting things in that regard. And also, it's very hard to imagine anyone but Brad Dourif voicing Chucky. He has such a distinctive voice, and again, I mean, he's done 7 movies now. It's hard to replace someone like that. Like they tried to do it with Robert Englund in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, where they recast him, and no one was going to do that justice. But I will say they have Mark Hamill doing the voice in the new one, in the remake, and he does really well. Like obviously has a huge catalog of voice acting experience, and I feel like, not to mention the fan cred of being Luke Skywalker. So I feel like he was like a good choice. That even if you don't like the movie, you have to admit like they couldn't really have found a better replacement for Chucky, even though they didn't need one. But they couldn't have found a better one than him.
Yeah, especially his work as big villains like the Joker.
Exactly, and he brings a lot of that, similar to what he brings to the voice of the Joker. There's a lot of that in Chucky.
Yeah, he has done a lot of great voice work, and obviously some people know him from, well, a lot of people know him from Star Wars, but some people might not even realize how extensive his voice work filmography is.
Yeah, I base this purely on speculation, but I'm pretty sure has way more voice work than he has had, on-screen work.
Yeah, it's just Star Wars is so big. It's hard to not know him from that, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
What I also enjoyed about this were some of the set pieces. Like, I absolutely love that apartment building elevator.
Yes, that's such a good, like, production design. I don't know if that was a set, if that was part of a real apartment with an elevator, but like, yes, that was a really cool design. And you mentioned, I forgot to mention, but you had touched on Maggie's death earlier. I think that's a great set piece too, that again holds up pretty well considering it's 80s visual effects. But spoiler alert, obviously, but she kind of plummets to her death getting pushed out a window. And it looks pretty good, better than a lot of similar effects from that era.
Yeah, it really did hold up well. And one thing I pointed out semi-recently, I think it was the crossover episode I did with Genre Vision on Stay Alive. Everyone in movies have massive apartments because, this is a single mom with a son. They have 2 separate rooms. It seems like they have one like adjoining bathroom or something. There's 2 entrances to the bathroom. I think it's from the mom's room and the hallway maybe, because they probably share the bathroom. But so it's a 2-bedroom, fairly good sized living room and a decent sized kitchen dining room area. And I'm like, okay, she's selling jewelry at presumably like this big box store, like a Macy's or something. I know it's not a Macy's, but it's a store like that. And I was like, this doesn't really add up, but we're going to let it slide because everyone in the movies all these people have big apartments.
That's a good point. I never thought of that, because she does make a point to say, like, I don't have the money to buy Chucky right now, and she has to get this, this cursed one, little does she know. But yeah, it is a pretty nice place, and it's not like, because Andy later has to go to like the bad part, the seedy part of Chicago. So it's not like they live within that area.
He takes the subway. He takes,
So it seems like it's like not a bad area. That's probably, again, like you implied, way above her means, way beyond her character's means. But yeah, that's funny. I never thought of that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like the apartment was super high end, granite countertops and all that stuff. But it's like any 2-bedroom apartment, even in the late 80s, for a single mom would probably be tough to swing.
Yeah, definitely. And even like you said, it's a modest apartment, but I mean, even Andy's room is like, it's not like this tiny little closet. It's like a good size bedroom for a kid.
Yeah, and again, those are just things I happen to notice. I don't let them really sway my opinion of a movie, but it's just fun to notice those things because it's like, well, this doesn't really add up, but it also doesn't really take anything away from the movie.
Right, yeah.
So, Alex, I know you like to turn the tables on me a little bit and ask me some questions every now and then when we do these episodes. Do you have anything for me before we start wrapping up?
Okay, I want to see. So you've seen all these firsts in most of the major franchises. I'd say which one made you want to watch the next installment the most? I guess you've watched Halloween 2, so maybe that's your answer. But I guess, yeah, which one made you want to kind of continue and see where the story goes?
I think you are right that it is Halloween because, as you know, I've bought pretty much all of the movies just within like the last week or two to fill in what I hadn't seen. I had seen the first one and the most recent, hadn't seen anything in between, or if I have, it's only been bits and pieces. And at the moment, the only one I don't have is the second Rob Zombie Halloween.
Yeah, that's a very polarizing one. So I guess we'll see how you feel about his first one to see if you really need to hunt down the second one. But yeah, we'll talk.
Yeah, but I think Michael Myers is compelling because he committed his crime so young and he sort of held on to this anger the entire time he was locked away until he escaped. And then he went on his killing spree. So it was like only one crime caused him to go away. And he wasn't technically a serial killer until he escaped however many years later, 15 years later, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting from a more psychological perspective.
Yeah, it's a little more to chew on than a guy uses voodoo to possess a doll. I'll give you that.
And then, like you said, Halloween 2, the whole dynamic between him and Laurie being explored even more. It's just like, I kind of want to see how that plays out in the other movies, even though I've seen the latest one.
Yeah, well, the thing about, not to get too sidetracked here, but the thing about the Halloween franchise in particular is there's like 4 different timelines within the franchise you could follow. So I'm excited to hear which one you prefer and your thoughts on that when you get there. But I guess in regards to Child's Play, where would you rank that among the other? I feel like Chucky's he's certainly like a top tier horror icon, but thought of, after your Freddy and your Jason and your Michael and maybe your Leatherface. But again, it's to me, maybe the first one isn't as strong as say the first Halloween or Elm Street, but again, it's a little more consistent. Or at least interesting in the fact that a singular voice kind of corralled them all and wrote them all. So it wasn't just whoever was hired that year to make the new sequel. It's one person's vision kind of expanding and evolving over almost 30 years.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've seen the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've seen one of them, but I think it might have been like the reboot in what was it, in the mid 2000s roughly?
Yeah, that was one of like the first big remakes. The Jessica Biel one, I think it was like 2003.
That tracks because I think I watched it when I was in like 8th grade, which was probably not the best idea.
Speaking of Child's Play and early horror memories, these were actually the first horror movies I saw. My brother, who to this day can't watch a full horror movie. I mean, he's in his 30s and has a wife and kid, but does not like horror whatsoever. But had a friend over for a sleepover and rented Child's Play 3, which must have been the newest one at the time. This would have been, early mid 90s.
VHS days.
Yes, definitely rented it on VHS from our local, I think it was a Hollywood Video. And it was like a 2-night rental, so they watched it. I'm sure my brother didn't sleep at all that night, but we had it the next day, and I had a friend over, so we watched it. And I was like, I mean, the third one, you'll see when you get there, it's it's not scary at all, especially when you compare it to the first two, which again aren't super scary, but for a kid you can see it. But even by kids standards, it's not super scary, but it definitely has moments that creep me out as a kid, having never seen a full horror movie before. But it was like, which I guess later came back in life, and I'm still kind of chasing that high of wanting to find something that will scare me and see where these stories go. But I was so intrigued by it, I convinced my mom to let me rent the first two, and those were the first horror movies I ever saw. And I didn't really evolve beyond that for several years. Then this I was in maybe middle school at the time. And then maybe 5 years later, I started getting into all the other franchises. But I do vividly recall the only nightmare I've ever had where like I died or I woke up at the point where I would have died. Was shortly after watching those movies. I had a dream where like Chucky was, terrorizing me, and he electrocuted me, and then I woke up.
Wow. That is a super interesting story. And now we all know where Broke Horror Fan stemmed from, most likely.
Yes.
As far as, sort of, I guess we can call them the big four with Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, and Friday the 13th go, this is probably number 3 for me. I would say Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, this, and then Friday the 13th as far as, the first movies in the franchises go. And I'll be very interested to see how I feel about them as a whole once I somehow manage to get through them. Because I know, like, I bought this box set a year ago, roughly. It was like Black Friday last year, and I'm just now getting around to watching the first one, which, I mean, you know this, but for any of the listeners who might not know, I host a weekly Stephen King podcast that keeps me pretty busy. So it's not that I don't watch horror movies all year. It's just that those take up most of my time.
I will say, as far as the original movies go, my ranking would be the same as yours. So I'm interested to hear, once you do, in 10 years' time, make it through all 30 movies or whatever that make up all those franchises, how or if your ranking changes. But I will agree. I think nothing tops Halloween for me. That's my favorite movie. Elm Street is definitely like a top 5 movie for me. And then Child's Play is a little bit lower. And then Friday the 13th, I love the franchise as a whole, but the original I don't think is the strongest. I mean, we have a whole episode about that where people can hear me ramble about that one.
Yeah.
But that's one where I actually think several of the sequels are better than the original.
I've heard that about that franchise in particular. And what I think puts Halloween over the top of the rest of these is just the fact that John Carpenter's score is so good. You can't not notice it while you're watching that movie. And sometimes I don't think it's necessarily a good thing when music is super noticeable, but this is noticeable in a way where it just makes you tense up while you're watching the movie. And I never really felt any moments like that in Child's Play with the score necessarily.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think John Carpenter's scores are kind of the secret weapon throughout his filmography. Even his lesser movies, like later in his career, he still brought his A game as a composer. And even, I mean, I will say his score to the new Halloween, the Halloween 2018, is probably my favorite score of his ever. It does a similar thing that the original did, in that it bolsters everything. It makes it creepier, makes it scarier, makes the jump scares work better. But it also works as like I can put that on and listen to it as just background music, which is, I mean, granted, I do that with a lot of scores, but that one in particular, or John Carpenter's work in particular, it doesn't necessarily have all these loud like stingers and stabs or like extended orchestral elements. I love just the kind of the simplicity of the synthesizer and what it can do.
Yeah, with Child's Play, I honestly don't even remember much of the score. You obviously have those moments that are sort of heightened when Chucky is basically getting ready to attack. But other than that, I don't really recall anything in particular standing out, which is kind of a bummer, but I still really, really enjoyed the movie. I gave it a 4 out of 5, I want to say.
Yeah, I would give it the same. I would say maybe 4.5 if I'm feeling generous, but either way, I'm in the same ballpark.
Yeah, it's a really, really solid start to the franchise. And like we've said, I haven't seen the rest, but I think the fact that this has a full story from start to finish and doesn't just leave you hanging, that helps, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, anything else, Alex?
I was just gonna say, we're gonna have to get you, to see a couple more of the classics that spawn a franchise, so then we can further our debates.
Yeah.
And keep this going. We'll get you the original Texas Chainsaw. We got to get you. Have you seen Hellraiser?
I have, actually, yes. I have seen that one. I've only seen the first one, and I believe the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is on Shudder still right now, so I can definitely get that done soon.
I think you're right. That's a good one to put towards the top of your list.
Maybe that's tonight's movie pick. Unless I continue watching Lost. It's a really bad thing that I started Lost in the middle of October.
Yeah, I mean, what else would you want to watch in October?
The 800 horror movies you're about to tell me to watch?
Yes. No, I'll let you catch up on your 10 box sets or whatever, and then I'll come back to you with more recommendations.
That's perfect.
But no, thank you for having me. It's always fun. If you like my nerdy rants on horror movies, you can follow me at Broke Horror Fan on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and brokehorrorfan.com for my website.
You'll find links to those in the show notes. I highly recommend checking out Alex's website. It is where I find out about a lot of deals that probably cost me a lot of money, but that's okay.
Thanks, and I'm sorry.
It's all good. Thank you again for coming on. You'll definitely be back. We've already, set up Scream, because that's another one. A big franchise.
That's right. That
Not
would be
nearly as
major
long,
one.
But I do need to watch it.
Yes, less commitment. And again, that one's another one. I didn't bring it up earlier, but that is one that kind of had a sole voice, at least up until this new one. A sole voice behind them all. So that is another interesting one.
Yeah, I think that's always a plus when you can have that happen. And we've seen with some of the other franchises where things get a little crazy when you're trying to put together box sets and it's like, oh, but all different companies did these, so you got to get everyone to cooperate, and all different people were involved. So I think, it'll be interesting to see how the Chucky franchise plays out, because of the fact, like you said, it's the same people. And I'm definitely looking forward to getting through more of these.
Well, I look forward to hearing your reports.
All right, everyone, that does it for this episode of Welcome to Geekdom. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so through our Patreon. You can sign up for $1 a month. That'll get you a thank you on the show. $2 a month, you get to pick a topic that myself and a guest will discuss on the show. For $5 a month, you can join the Welcome to Geekdom Slack group, where you can talk to myself and various guests who have been on the show. If you want to follow us on socials, you can do so at GeekdomPod on Twitter and at Welcome to Geekdom on Instagram and Facebook. And as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.